creatine, omega-3s, antioxidants. How do you know what's going to give you the right performance edge?
When we have individuals try to recover, it's hydrate, carbs and protein, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory. And if you do those basic things, you're able to do more work the next few days without as much problem.
Dr. Rick Kreider, director of the Exercise and Sport Nutrition Lab at Texas A&M, has spent his career studying exactly what your body goes through during the toughest jobs. Today we talk about how what you choose to put in your body makes all the difference on the job and in the future.
We now know that you can load the muscle with creatine. Get more energy, don't hit the wall. So there's been a lot of studies that have looked at how providing creatine can improve exercise, but also all these different types of health benefits.
This is the WorkReady podcast. Today's conversation is with Dr. Rick Kreider. Dr. Kreider is a professor at Texas A&M University, director of the Exercise and Sport Nutrition Lab, and co-founder of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, an organization that has shaped how the world understands performance nutrition, supplementation, and human health. He's also one of the world's leading researchers on creatine, which is a compound that frequently is misunderstood, often debated, and increasingly relevant for anyone whose job demands physical output, resilience, and recovery. How should people be thinking about just an overarching strategy from a nutrition standpoint?
Yeah, I think the first principle is to realize that you are a well-trained machine and athlete. Okay, we think of athletes as kids in high school and college and pros. But if your body is your capability of your livelihood dependent on you being fit and agile and flexible and strong, then you got to look at it as an instrument that I've got to take care of. We have 5 principles to optimize health and performance. One is eat enough calories. So you got to have enough fuel to maintain body weight and effectively maintain muscle. Second is have enough macronutrients, which is carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Depending on how hard you're working, I mean, if you're a roofer or a pipe, my grandfather was a pipe line person, right? They're out there working hard all day long, okay? I had a real good friend that was a landscaper, and he'd go out there for 14 hours a day pushing wheelbarrows and throwing stuff, and it's more physically demanding than the Navy SEALs just about, okay? And if you're a roofer out in the hot and sun, you get all these environmental issues. So what are the principles? Get enough carbs to be able to perform, fuel the muscle for the intensity. You break down a lot of carbohydrate if you're doing a lot of heavy work. Second is to get enough protein so that you don't lose muscle mass. And that's usually about 1.4 to 2 grams per kg per day. Good easy thing to remember is a gram per pound you are. Something like that. You need a little more, probably a little less than that, but that's okay. And then you need essential fats, especially in your diet. Not a no-fat diet, but enough fat in your diet to have those essential fats that are needed for repair and hormone and cell membrane integrity. And if you fall down and have a concussion, all those type of things that can help you. So you have to have macronutrients. That's the second principle. Third principle is timing. What you have before you work out, during the intense activity all day long, and then after can facilitate recovery for the next day and the next week. And so I think teaching workers nutrient timing goals like we treat with athletes, a little bit of carbohydrate, protein, an hour or so before you start working hard, then feed the body throughout the day to make sure you're getting some carbs and protein throughout the day and make sure there's a lot of hydration. All those basic principles we apply to athletes also are probably more important for the worker that's out there for 10 or 12 hours. And then the next principle is hydration. There's a lot of people who do occupational jobs and demanding that really have a challenge with dehydration and cramping and all those type of issues. So there's some nutritional things you can do to try to hyperhydrate, add some glycerol to your drinks, make sure you creatine supplement and make sure the muscle can store a little bit more water. Higher carbohydrate diets help with fluid. And if you get done in the day and you weigh yourself, the difference in weight, every pound lost is 3 cups of water you should have had during the day. So if you lose 10 pounds out on the roof one day, you need more fluids all day long. Okay. And then there's electrolytes and things you can actually do to enhance that to recover. And then after you hydrate, uh, then we look at recovery. How do you recover? Reduce inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, which is like fish oil, those type of things. Um, and then nootropics, things that help you think more clearly, are now a big aspect. So if we apply these principles of training of athletes to the occupational individual, whether they're a fire person, whether they're a tactical, police officer out there, or whether they're a line worker, or whether they're, a roofer or whatever, it's the same principles. The body has a lot of work to do. You got to feed the engine to help you recover and be able to perform the next day well.
That's so well said, and it's such a good reminder that yeah, a lot of these industrial athletes, they're out there sometimes 2 to 3 times longer than an athlete would be out on the field every day practicing. And then you have the environmental factors, and so you're in Texas. I mean, it's way hotter there than it is where I'm at here in Washington State. So how does temperature regulation fit into this equation?
Well, it affects hydration and it affects electrolyte status in particular. So the more you sweat, the more electrolytes, salt, sodium, those type of things you lose. And you have to acclimatize. And one of the challenges if you're working, there's not time to acclimatize. It's either cold one day and it's real hot in Texas the next day. And so in the beginning of the year, when it's starting to get hot and stay hot, it's usually when there are more challenges because your body's not as accustomed to it. But if you spend 3 or 4 days and get more and more exposure in the heat, it can help the body adapt to that heat. And then lots of fluids. We actually, in some folks who sweat a lot and still have issues, add a little bit more salt to a sports drink type of approach. There's a lot of uh, uh, products out there now with about a gram of salt per liter of fluid, and that's kind of the upper end for endurance and ultra endurance type people. Well, the worker outside's that same thing. And so if it's real hot and you're sweating a lot, you got to realize you have to hydrate. You have to get the electrolytes. And if you're not, that's going to make it much more difficult to recover, make it more easier to have balance problems, which leads to falls, have more issues with cramping, um, even cognitive focus. When you're fatigued, you don't think clearly. So the better shape you're in and the better you handle these things as part of the job process. We tell athletes to consume fluids every 10 to 15 minutes during heavy exercise. Do we do that in workers? No. What we do when I was working, heavy outside work and construction and stuff, it's like, oh, you get your break after 2.5 hours and you go down and drink it or whatever you eat when you can and you go back to work. Well, you have to have fluids. And so there are things that can be done to help make it easier to perform well. And the more better you perform, what does it mean? It means you get done faster. It means you can turn the wrench or whatever you're doing quicker and be able to get the next project and the next, the next funded issue that you're working on. So all those things make a important factor. So if you're smart and prepare yourself and are systematic in how your body and treating your body and your workers by providing fluids and things throughout the day and gels and electrolytes and make sure there's plenty of breaks, you end up being more productive and get to the next job faster. So all these things can make an impact.
Now, I want to highlight two things that you mentioned because eating well, hydrating well, and thermoregulation, those are safety issues as well. And you said it, when you do those things well, your brain can function better, your balance is better, your coordination is better. And so it's actually a safety component as well.
Absolutely. And you think about some of these jobs are very dangerous. I mean, if you're a line
Yeah.
person, you're up on top of a, extended, platform. If you're working beams and stuff in construction, I mean, these folks are walking down, and even if they have, extra harnesses and stuff, falls happen, slips happen. If you're fatigued, you don't think clearly, you don't have as much balance and coordination. And then if you're cramping because you're not hydrated well, it makes it worse. So all those things are for safety, but they're also for productivity.
Absolutely. One of the questions I've been asked quite a bit recently is the food pyramid has kind of changed recently. I mean, basically 180 degrees, it got inverted. And I think it's been something most of us in sports performance and nutrition have intuitively thought, this isn't the traditional pyramid that we've had for the last 40 years, isn't really the way that we've actually been recommending people eat, especially athletes. What are your thoughts on the new food pyramid?
I like it. One of my former PhD students, he's Major Nick Behringer, uh, he now has been out and he's now retired, was actually at the ceremony. And he was influential. And it looked like they took stuff out of my book and said, okay, here's how to optimize performance. Because we've known for a long time, the original pyramid was high carb, moderate protein, kind of on the lower end, and then low fat. And we thought by going that approach, you'd be less fat, you'd be leaner, and you would have less obesity. But now we know with athletes, if you're an endurance and ultra endurance athlete or really working hard, you need a lot more carbs. Okay. That's basic principle. However, most people who kind of have mixed activity levels or are power athletes or out there, for 8 or 10 hours doing a triathlon or something, they can get away with less carbohydrate, which means that they can up their protein. And we know for recovery, the protein's really important to help maintain muscle and help promote recovery and less soreness between exercise bouts. Simply changing the amount and quality of protein could impact on your recovery. We just published a paper that showed that. And so, uh, and then the other aspect is a health aspect. We don't need to treat the average person like an elite athlete that's 55 to 65% carbohydrate. Um, they don't need that much carbohydrate either. So I like the change. I like the emphasis on good quality carbohydrates. Eat whole foods. That's the basic principle of sports nutrition: food first, and make sure you have enough carbohydrates to fuel the intensity. Then make sure you have a high quality proteins in your diet for recovery, and then be smart about having fats that can be helpful, especially those essential fatty acids. And that really is what we recommend for folks trying to lose weight, gain weight, and then we add more carbohydrate if the intensity is really, really high. So I kind of thought it was a very good type of change.
As a safety leader, you have more risks to cover than hours in the day. That's where Vimosity comes in. We give you one platform to scale your impact, delivering expert curated safety campaigns on everything from slip, trips, and falls to heat stress and soft tissue injury prevention. You'll reach every crew through the channels that they already use, while gaining data insights to guide smarter prevention. With Vimosity, you can boost awareness, prevent serious incidents, and keep your workforce ready for the job. Scan the QR code or visit vimosity.com to learn how leading utilities are cutting injuries by 50%. For our audience, can you share some examples of essential fatty acids and how those are different than some of the other foods that or fats that we may get through our food?
So I can give you a couple. So one, for example, is you get a lot of omega-3 fatty acids from things like fatty fish, the skin, like from salmon, all right? That slimy portion on top of the meat. Well, that has a lot of very important essential fats that will help with the brain and hormone and help maintain the integrity of your cells. And so that's an essential fat, very important. Avocado. My wife loves avocado. Ideally wasn't too interested. Now it's like, man, there's a lot of essential fats, quality fats in avocado. So I kind of throw that on my foods a lot now, or don't mind it in my salads. It's like, okay, I'm getting some good fat. It used to be no fat, no fat. Stay away from fat, right? Now it's like, if it's good fat, good. The other really interesting thing is if you look at dairy, whole fats versus lower fats and skim milk type of dairy. When you take out that extra fat, you save calories, true, but you also take out all those essential fats. And there's some essential fats in dairy, for example, there's something called conjugated linoleic acid, CLA. It's actually a supplement. And what it does is help promote fat loss. And there have been studies, large epidemiological studies, and people who have high dairy, of whole dairy foods, have less body fat, have less risk to cancer, and a number of other health factors. So we've known about these essential fats. Now the question is, how can we get in their diet and not have all the extra calories maybe that you don't want, but those essential fats are very important to get at least 25% of your fat in your diet. We say never go under 20%, in part because you'll limit those essential fatty acids. So there are foods that are great sources of these essential fats, mainly omega-3s, CLA, and those type of content. And if you're going to pick fat, those are the ones to pick. So consume, your high quality protein and you've got enough carbohydrate, complex carbohydrate, and then be selective on the fats you choose that they have a little bit more essential fats in them.
That's great. And they're essential because we can only get them from food. Is that the concept
Yes.
there?
So most people know what an essential amino acid is. Got
Hmm.
to get in your diet. You don't make it in your body. Well, that's the same thing with essential fats. There are some fats your body can readily make, store, but these essential fats, they are not effective, can't produce them, these type of fats. And if you don't have them, you can't put together like lipid membranes as effectively. Um, your nerve conduction may not be as good. And there's things like the higher the omega-3, the less risk of cardiovascular disease. And so there's a lot of benefits of these essential fats. And so part of the pyramid was to take the dogma that fats were bad off and that some fats are good when selected wisely and whole food choices.
Well, I'm so excited about the changes, and I know that you definitely had a big influence on that through your work over the years. So thank you for that. Going back to like specific recommendations, and maybe you can give some examples. Recovery is so important, especially after a hard day work, because you're setting yourself up for being able to work the next day and reduce soreness and build your body up so that it doesn't fall into that breakdown mode. Are there some like really practical foods that people can, target right after a hard day's work so that it sets their body up for the
Sure.
best recovery?
So I think the first thing is rehydrate. Every pound loss, 3 cups. And make sure that it's got some electrolytes in them. So a lot of individuals who are working a lot, losing a lot of body water, will throw an electrolyte, stick or something in their drinks and mix it. Make sure they have those electrolytes hydrated. So the first thing is hydrate. Second thing though is if you consume carbohydrate and protein right after exercise, within an hour or two, it speeds up recovery because you have more glycogen, more glucose from the food can be stored as muscle glycogen. That's your energy. And by having those extra proteins, then your body, it's just gone through breakdown, has those essential amino acids circulating in the blood so it can repair. And the issue with amino acids is if I'm missing some and I don't have those essential amino acids at enough, you just don't repair, you don't recover. Okay. And so you simply need to have some higher quality protein. Usually those are animal proteins, or if you want to take plant proteins, realize you need about a third more, 30% or so more plant protein powder to equal the same amount of uh, animal powder, gram per gram. Okay. And so getting those proteins are there. Then what else we do? We try to provide some antioxidants and anti-inflammatories to help with the recovery process. So antioxidants are things like um, fish oil or vitamin E or vitamin C to some degree. And so there are some vitamins and things you can do after a workout. And then the anti-inflammatory are things like tart cherry or uh, bright blueberry type of fruits and vegetables, green leafy vegetables, or astaxanthin that we just did a study on, or things like curcumin, which are good, or turmeric, very good anti-inflammatories. And then we even just got done doing a study and published a paper on ginger, how that has much less inflammation. So when we have individuals try to recover, it's hydrate, carbs and protein, and then antioxidants and anti-inflammatory. And if you do those basic things after recovery, you typically will be able to have less muscle soreness the day after or 2 days after when it's delayed, and you're able to do more work the next few days without as much problem. That's especially important as you age, because if you've noticed as you age, you work out hard, you do a lot of work outside or something, you do some weekend event and you're playing a game or whatever, and it takes 2, 3, 4 days. Instead of just 24 hours, you're feeling good the next day, no problem. That's more like 2, 3 days before you really feel like you're recovered. That's where it's really important to enhance that recovery process.
An analogy that I sometimes give, and check me to make sure that this is totally an accurate way of saying this, but I oftentimes tell people that if the first thing you grab, after a hard day's work is a bunch of processed food. Let's say you grab chips and Monster Energy drink, and you're just pounding all this stuff that's high in sugar, that has low nutrient density. It's kind of like remodeling your house because your body's going through a repair mode, but you're using cheap building materials to remodel your
Mhm.
house. And those cheap building materials eventually are not going to last as long. They're going to break down faster and they're not going to be as durable. Is that kind of an analogy of like when you are repairing with poor building materials for your body through the nutrition that you're eating, it's it's makes you more prone to inflammation, it makes you more susceptible to
Yeah,
injury potentially in the future even.
yes, to some degree. I mean, obviously, you want to have quality, nutrient dense foods after your workout. So your body has all the vitamins, minerals, carbohydrate, proteins, essential amino acids, all those things, essential fats needed for repair. Um, if you don't eat after a workout, it takes longer to recover. It takes longer to replenish your glycogen. It takes longer to replenish your repair your muscle protein. If you don't have any antioxidants or anti-inflammatories in post-workout, you're going to be sore, right? You're going to have more stress. And so, if the other thing also is if you go get just a bunch of fast food after workout, that's got lots of fat and maybe a little bit of protein, a little bit of carb, but it's not quality. It takes longer to digest those foods that are higher fat. Okay. And so all those things can slow the process. So the timing is a little snack before you work out, make sure you're hydrated and getting some nutrients if you're out there a long day or a long period of time. And once the practice or work is over, it should be quality fluids, electrolytes, should be quality carbohydrate and protein. And then this were supplements with antioxidants. Some people drink, tart cherry juice or beetroot juice or things like that after a recovery to try to get some of these naturally occurring phytonutrients that we know have these anti-inflammatory and antioxidant type effects. And studies have shown now, a number of studies of lots of different types, that these type of plant uh, phytonutrients are very important for optimizing recovery, reducing soreness. And so, if you're a worker and you want to have a good hard week of work, you don't want to be tired, fatigued, and sore on Tuesday or Wednesday. You got 3 more days. You got to knock it out. If you're on a heavy job on a tight deadline, you're going 6, maybe sometimes 7 days in a row. If there's an emergency out there and the lines go down, they got to be out there in terrible weather, and there's no stop. Okay, if you're in the military, they don't make them take a break. Right? They got a mission to do. And so that's the type of things you got to do to make sure you're refueling and recovering. Think yourself like a NASCAR. You come in for a pit stop, you got to have good fuel, right? You put cheap gas in there, it's not going to go very far. It's the same thing with realizing your body is important, and you can optimize its recovery if you feed it properly.
How does alcohol impact recovery?
Great question. All right, athletes are not immune to drinking after a workout or a game or a competition. We know that alcohol can actually impede recovery a bit. So we tell our athletes, when you're going through heavy training, stay away from excessive alcohol because it actually can slow down protein synthesis and not even counting all the, you know, psychological, psychomotor type of effects. But here's the other issue. If you work a hard day, what's the habit? You work hard, you hit the, you know, gotta get some brewskis and stuff afterwards, right? You gotta get a 6 pack or a 12 pack or whatever, and that's the habit. That doesn't facilitate recovery. That's fluid, but there's not much electrolytes, and that's carbohydrate, even, but it's alcohol is not a good carbohydrate to store. Your body can't use it that effectively, and so a lot of times they're empty calories, and it doesn't allow the body to recover. And that, you know, people may feel like it's hydration and all that, but it's not the type of thing you want to refuel more than a normal amount. Now, there is some data on moderation. You know, red wine's got resveratrol and those type of things in it. The data is kind of sometimes pro, sometimes against, but most of the studies show that more than two alcohol drinks a day is not a good health outcome over time.
How about nicotine? I know that there's nicotine in tobacco. I know that there's some research that shows that it impacts spinal health, and people who take or use tobacco may be at a higher risk for disc herniation.
Yes, there's data that if you're a smoker, you have greater propensity for herniated discs and those type of issues. So if you're a worker and you're picking things up, you know, it actually makes it harder because you're not getting the nutrients into your intervertebral disc as you should. So that's one issue. The other issue, um, it's kind of a stimulant and it's become a habit, obviously. There can be some lung issues. So if I'm a smoker, they don't have the same aerobic capacity or oxidative capacity as a person who is a non-smoker. You can have somebody smoke and look at their exercise capacity before they smoke and after, and their exercise capacity is diminished. So that's not something you want to do. And now I'm kind of worried about all the marijuana and stuff that's out there people are using and things. And then you got to worry about, you know, being really focused and those type of nootropic issues as well. And so smoking is usually not something you want to do if you're trying to be optimally performing. Um, Now there could be some skills, you know, that aren't really aerobic capacity dependent that maybe not hurt. But most workers out there, they're picking objects up, they're working hard, spending a lot of calories, makes you have to breathe harder. It just wouldn't be something that's optimal um, for an individual. And then there's also interest in nicotine as it's, you know, like in a dip in a tune where there's nootropic. There are some kind of caffeine effects that you might get that make you feel alert. Um, but again, there's some downsides of it as
You mentioned aerobic capacity, and then you also mentioned earlier maintaining muscle mass as two important factors for like longevity and health. And you know, for people who are working 10 to 12 hours a day, I mean, they're on their feet all day long. And, you know, it's hard to feel motivated to exercise on top of that. But
well. That's right.
why is doing some additional specific exercise maybe important for longevity and overall health?
Yeah, so you have to think to yourself, you need kind of a balanced approach. And so, how do you improve health related fitness? It's aerobic capacity, it's strength and endurance, it's flexibility, and it's optimal body composition. These are kind of the five standard points. Now, if I'm lifting heavy all the time, I'm getting some cardiovascular, I'm getting a lot of muscles stress. But if I am aerobic fit on top of that, and I add some walking or some cycling or something, I will recover faster between lifts or work tasks. So I feel that I'm more fit, I can do more work. So there is some transfer. And so if you are a very aerobic job occupation, it's more, you know, walking and not, maybe it's a mailman or a woman or something that's walking all day. Well, that's a lot of aerobic, but you also need to have strengthening and flexibility to offset and to make sure it's a balanced health thing. So I would look at the occupation, find out what most that you're doing. If you're lifting heavy objects all the time, probably don't need to do as much weightlifting, but the cardio would probably help. Vice versa, if you're the mail deliverer individual and you're getting a lot of walking or even UPS in and out of the truck or whatever it might be, you're getting a lot of of movement, but you probably need more resistance activity on top of that to complement it. So that's what I would look for. Everybody should be doing some resistance training, some cardio, and maintaining flexibility as they age.
One of the really exciting things over the last maybe 20 years, and it actually extends beyond that, is just the amount of research that has gone into validating the effectiveness of creatine. And you've been someone who's really led that research. I just again attended another seminar, and they talked about how there are about 3,200 studies that have been performed on creatine, validating the effectiveness. Can you share with us a little bit about the history of creatine? Because I know when I was playing sports in the mid '90s, my mom was like, "Do not take creatine because it's not good for you," and it's oftentimes associated with people who are trying to bulk up, but there are so many benefits for the general population. Love to hear more about that.
So creatine is a basic energy that's in the cell, and it's used to replenish or to resynthesize the energy you break down in ATP. ATP is like the common source of energy. So the more phosphocreatine you have in a muscle, the better you're able to maintain his ATP levels. So you can do your daily activities, you can do an exercise, and have plenty of energy. Okay. We now know that if you increase dietary availability of creatine monohydrate, that you can load the muscle with creatine. Almost like loading the muscle with carbohydrate before an endurance athlete. So you eat more extra carbohydrate, you get more muscle glycogen, you get more energy, you don't hit the wall. Okay, what we call hitting the wall in a marathon. You get 18 miles into it, you don't get more glycogen, and all you got is fat, and it feels like you hit a wall because it's all you got to fuel, and you have to slow down. And so creatine, we know, can increase the stores in muscle, but we also now can increase in the brain, in the heart, and other tissues. And so what we've found out is what we thought was once a supplement for athletes and power athletes in particular now has application from third trimester pregnancy all the way to the a very old individual. And there have been hundreds and hundreds of clinical trials done. We just reviewed 680 of them
Wow.
for looking at safety. And in all populations, from children, pregnant folks to children, all the way to the elderly. And they're now also NHANES database analyses of going back, looking at people who had more creatine in their diet, where they had more or less disease. And we know that people who have higher creatine in their diet have much less chronic disease progression as they age. Their children are leaner, more muscle mass, less body fat, and as girls go through puberty, have less issues. And then as you become an adult, you have less incidence of some chronic disease. And then when you're older and you have a higher diet in creatine, you have better cognitive function. And so there's been a lot of studies that have looked at how providing creatine can improve exercise, but also all these different type of health benefits. We're now doing studies in 45 to 75-year-old individuals where we're loading them with creatine and maintaining 10 grams a day of creatine um, throughout a 12-week period and looking at cognitive function, muscle mass, body composition. And we did this last study that's in review now. We actually put people on a diet. And usually when you go on a diet, you lose muscle, you lose some fat, but you lose muscle too. And so we put people on a resistance training program, put them on a diet, gave them creatine or placebo, and the people who took creatine had a much better percent body fat loss, got stronger, more muscle than just resistance training and exercise alone. And then we said, well, what about people who don't want to lift weights? I mean, or exercise? They also benefited and got some more muscle mass and more cognitive function. So there's benefits as we age, and probably creatine is more important as you get older, even as we see in athletes and they're younger.
You mentioned a dose of 10 grams. Is that a pretty universal number for most people?
It's the emerging number. So usually what we've talked about was loading 20 grams a day. It's 4 doses of 5 grams a day for a week. And then you just need 1 teaspoon, 3 to 5 grams a day. It keeps your muscles full. Now know that creatine is stored in other tissues. And for example, in the brain, it takes more creatine in the diet to increase the brain content. And if you increase creatine in the brain, you get better cognitive function. And so we've been now, and one of the mysteries is, well, maybe we haven't been giving enough in these studies. So we are actually giving 2 5-gram doses a day. And we've done it 6-week and 12-week interventions with and without training, and showing that creatine can help with muscle as well as cognitive function. And then we're even adding the precursor to creatine, which does get in the brain better. The precursor is called GAA, guanidine acetic acid, and it seems to get in the brain better. So you only need about a gram. You give a gram of that with 5 grams of creatine, so you get your muscle and brain optimized. And we're looking at that. We're just about done doing a study on that. We did see and already have a paper in that's in review showing 6 weeks of that had benefits of creatine and some additive benefits when you add a little bit of GA to it as well. So we're still exploring the 10 grams per day, but we think most of the creatine researchers feel that you probably need about 10 grams a day. And one of the reasons for that is we know that if you were going to go through sleep deprivation, for example, those studies are a high dose, 20 or 30 grams. And after 36 hours of sleep deprivation, people on creatine tend to be able to do cognitive motor skills better. And so there's even one study just came out, 30 grams in one drink, one shot, 36 hours later had better cognitive function. So we're learning more about the dosages for the brain, but I think that 5 to 10 grams is, 5 is kind of just for general health. 10 is probably what we recommend more so consistently now for the brain.
And our body naturally produces creatine, and then we can also get it from foods. Can you explain a little bit more about that and why it's important to maybe supplement with an additional 5 to 10
Sure.
grams?
So your body produces about 1 to 2 grams of creatine itself per day. That's about half of the daily need. The more you exercise, the more muscle mass you have, the more need for creatine you have, and your body doesn't increase its synthesis rate to accommodate enough. And so uh, the next place you get the creatine is from food, and there's about 2 to 3 grams of creatine per pound of red meat and fish, for example, like salmon. Um, some a little bit higher, some a little lower, but 2 grams a pound. So if I need 2 to 4, recommend 5, 10 grams a day, do I want to have 6 pounds of fish per day? It will cost me probably 50, $60. Or that much meat per day, or can I take a supplement and I get plenty of creatine and I don't have to have all those extra calories and all the extra fat coming with those sources of in the diet. So we tell folks have a good, healthy diet, high quality protein, and that will get most people about a gram extra a day of creatine, and then add a little bit of creatine with a teaspoon of creatine monohydrate. That's the one that's been shown to be effective in all the studies. And then you get plenty of creatine for the body.
And if you just type in creatine monohydrate when you're searching for what's available, you get on Amazon and there are about 50 different options that pop up. What should people look for in terms of how it's sourced? And I always recommend anything that is NSF certified. Can you explain why there may
Sure.
be some certifications that we would want to pay attention to?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I always recommend German creatine. That's the group from Allchem. They make Pure and Korea Vitalis. Why? 95% of all studies that we've known about on creatine have been using those products. It's the purest source. It's the only one that's approved in Europe and a few other countries that could be sold and made claims about. There are a few other sources, usually from China. Sometimes their batches are good. Sometimes they have more impurities. It's a little bit more iffy. And so we suggest if you can take creatine, take the quality creatine we know it works. So we always say look for German creatine. Okay. And then as far as NSF certification, that looks at third party testing, and that's looking for drug um, contents. Things are banned substances, like an Olympic athlete or NCAA athlete they get drug tests, and they're looking for a lot of different metabolites and things that might suggest they're taking steroids or something that might mask steroids. And so by having a company do the NSF testing or similar compounds like Quality, there's a few other ones out there do the same thing, um, you know that the probability of having a tainted supplement or some banned supplement in there is very low. Could happen, but it's much, much lower. So we always suggest quality supplement, German creatine, and then if you're going to take supplements in any supplements, make sure they're third party tested because that means that they aren't going to have anything in there that you don't want.
Absolutely. And you know, I was just at Costco the other day and they were handing out creatine gummies in the sample section. And that's a common form that you're seeing out there. But I've read some articles that suggest that maybe there's not quite as much creatine in those as maybe
Correct.
advertised. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So when you put creatine in fluid, about a week after, so sit in your refrigerator or something, you'll lose about 10 to 20% of the creatine because it naturally converts to its conversion. It's called creatinine. It's something measured in the urine to see if you might have some kidney issues. Um, if you make gummies, there's moisture involved. Okay. There's a heating process involved. The heat's usually not that much of a degradation, but the moisture over time can. So this is why we don't see creatine in beverages at this point, because they haven't really figured out a way to keep it shelf stable for 6 months, a year, and still have the same amount of creatine you want it without a lot of creatinine. What we're finding with gummies is that some of the brands are pretty good and some of the brands are just junk. In fact, there have been some tests found no creatine in any of them. Probably the best out there from a brand perspective is Create. It uses German creatine, but they have enough in there to allow for any loss to still meet label claims. So one of the things they do is if they want 1.5 grams per 2 or 3 gummies, whatever it is, they'll put 1.8 or so to account for any loss to creatinine. So then the question is, it's expensive. My wife loves those gummies. But it's every time she takes it's like $2 or $3, that a canister, it's about $40 or something like that. 20 servings, it's like $2. Take a teaspoon, man, save a little bit and only 10 cents or so. So, everybody loves the gummies. Now there's one group that I just became aware of. They make a creatine chew. It's a company that is a pharmaceutical company that does this for drugs, and it's called Catalent. I just started working with them a little bit and talking about how they might be able to do some sport nutrition things with that. And they have 2 year lifespan data showing no breakdown at all. So I think we're going to learn a lot about how can we provide creatine in a portable way other than a powder. And I know that there's also some groups working on some fluids that appear to have a little bit of stability to them. So maybe you'll have something like, buy your milk and drink it best date by or something like that. I could see something like that happening within the next year or two with some of these creatine beverages that are fair. There's one out there that after 3 to 6 months, it still has 70%. Now, I don't know if I want to have 30% of my creatine I think I'm paying for as creatinine. You probably get excreted. Probably not a big deal, but your urine creatinine levels may go up, and your doctor might say, "What's going on?"
Yeah.
Consuming some junk creatine. Um, so those are some of the considerations, but there are a few out there that are pretty decent, and then there's some that are junk. A lot of times, the stuff on Instagram I'd stay away from.
I had someone reach out to me last week and they had two questions. They had a 16-year-old daughter who plays basketball, and they're asking me, is creatine safe for her, number one? And then he had heard some concern about taking too much creatine and that impacting your kidney function. Uh, what are your thoughts on those two questions?
Both are false anecdotes. So kids should be on creatine. They should have more creatine in their diet. Kids that don't have at least 1 gram of creatine per day as they're getting older don't grow as fast. They're shorter, they have less muscle, more body fat. And we know now with the changes in diet and things about what type of foods people want to eat or not, especially with these environmental concerns. Some of the kids are not eating as much meats and things, and so their dietary sources, you don't get any creatine from plant. And so vegetarians we've known for a long time have to really depend on supplemental creatine, or they just will not be able to have enough energy in the muscle for high intensity activity, and even some health issues. So you got to have enough creatine. Kids, we just published a paper, an opinion about you shouldn't be restricting creatine from kids. Um, it's a healthy thing to consume quality protein. It's a healthy thing to consume creatine, especially if kids are maturing past puberty, trying to get muscle mass, trying to build. My daughter played basketball up through into college. Uh, I coached women's basketball, and creatine was absolutely something we used to our advantage. And we've done studies in adolescent swimmers, for example, that averaged 16 and had performance benefits. And all the data on safety shows that there's no problem, even in kids. In fact, in kids, most of the high dose studies were done in kids that don't make their own creatine on their own. They're deficient in some enzymes. And so they're given like 20, 30 grams a day for their entire life. And that slows down or improves their cognitive abilities and their psychomotor abilities, and they have less negative effects of not having enough creatine in the body. Um, so kids with creatine, not a problem as long as they're training well, eating right, doing all the first things they know. You buy a quality supplement, their parents know and agree. And if their parents have questions, you go online and find our position stands about creatine, get the facts, and you'll see that this is something good for athletes.
Yeah,
And
do you have a
if
quick reference that you can recommend for where people can find that position statement?
well, our position statement is the International Society of Sports Nutrition position stand on creatine supplementation. And in there, it talks about kids that as long as they do those things, there's not a problem. And then our most recent paper we published on kids is basically creatine should not be restricted from children and adolescents. And that's, you put Kreider in there and put down kids and adolescents for safety. You'll hit all these papers that we published on peer reviewed journals. And it gives you the 10 main reasons why they should be taking creatine and why we shouldn't have laws to try to restrict the ability of people under 18 from taking creatine and making their parents show ID to get creatine to their child. It's just stupid. Okay, we don't do that when they go to Starbucks. Why in the world we're doing that when they want to buy a protein drink or a protein bar or something? What's better? 800 calorie, high fructose sugared drink and caffeine, or an energy bar that's got some creatine in it. Come on. So you can find that online. And then the other thing is that safety. We just published a huge safety study, 685 studies, 13,000 people on creatine, 13,000 people on placebos. The people who were taking placebos had more side effects than people taking creatine. So a lot of the myths you hear are being perpetuated by people who don't know anything about creatine, or a lot of times it's companies saying, take our new version of creatine, it won't cause this or that or that. And nobody found this or that in any studies, but you still see this stuff out there. And, unfortunately, that's what people read. And so we have a website called creatineforhealth.com, all one word, creatineforhealth.com. And you can find out about and hear from the experts of how creatine is good for kids. How creatine is maybe helpful if you have diabetes, how it helps with elderly, how it helps with people who have brain and cognitive function issues. So, orthopedic issues and rehabilitation and the uses of creatine go on and on. And so find the facts, get information out, and then people make an informed decision.
Thank you so much. We're going to put those links in the show notes. And thank you for all the research that you've done. I mean, you've been a huge voice in this research. And so, yeah, thank you for that. I know that after reading some of your articles, like in preparation for this interview, I took 20 grams of creatine just so that I could be sharper. And I can tell a difference, just how I think. I've had multiple concussions over the course of my life. And even some of those
That's
symptoms that
another area.
that I've had symptoms like for the last 25 years, I've noticed that those have actually been noticeably improved by
Yes.
increasing my creatine intake.
I would add that when we first started creatine studies in the early 90s in athletes, We were the first group to do that in the United States. And we were given 20 and 25 grams a day of creatine for 15 weeks. And we gave up to 10 grams a day of creatine in a safety study we did for almost 3 years. And so a lot of our initial studies were high dose. And then as they figured out, well, you load, the muscle can maintain, you pretty much keep it up with 5 grams a day. A lot of the studies went to that. But we found some phenomenal results when you take that level of creatine every day. And we think it's because it has other effects like on cognition. Now, if you have a child, basketball player, soccer player, high school, college, that has a susceptibility to a concussion, or you're in the military and you have susceptibilities to blasts and accidents that might cause brain trauma and injury, we know that creatine can help prevent the damage that may occur after concussion in animals. These are studies where they hit the animals on the head, cause a concussion, cause ischemia, cause a stroke. And when they feed these animals creatine, the size of the damage is 1/3, one half the size if they were on placebo. And we also know that if you give creatine to former NFL players, for example, who have CTE, which causes a lot of degenerative effects, that they seem to also perform better at higher doses. And so there's a lot of truth of that. So one of the things we mentioned in our position stand is uh, the performance effects is one thing, but preventing trauma and concussion is probably the most important thing you can do for an athlete or a military person who's susceptible to that type of trauma. In fact, we met and went to the U.S. Congress and had a panel discussion about treating TBI and concussion. And the panel was Mike Lewis talking about fish oil and antioxidants, myself talking about creatine, and another person talking about anti-inflammatories. And everybody in the military should be taking creatine, fish oil, and some type of anti-inflammatory because you are susceptible to these type of issues. And so we're trying to get legislation passed where they add MREs, add some of these nutrients to them, or trying to get an appropriation bill so we do this massive study, national study with concussion to try to see if normal care or creatine, fish oil, and inflammatories would help reduce the time and severity of the concussion and get you back ready to play or ready to work or ready back to the operation faster. So yeah, concussions is huge.
That is really exciting and could be, very beneficial for so many people. Relating things back to the frontline worker, you mentioned something earlier related to people with like 36 hours of sleep deprivation. And there are a lot of people listening to this podcast who may be working a storm. So they're working 18 hours a day, 7 to 14 days in a row. And so the impacts of sleep deprivation over that amount of time can be pretty profound. And so it does seem like creatine, it may not be something that you would want to rely on replacing sleep, but something that could really be impactful to help people maintain that cognition, their awareness, multiple things.
Yeah, I think it's one of several things, to help with cognition, but, how do you improve brain health and function? Increase energy, create this energy in the brain. We know that ischemia conditions like stroke or concussion, and there's injury, that extra creatine is an extra kind of battery for energy so that the cells that can become damaged, the cells around it are like lacking energy, can survive, and then you have less damage. It's almost like the old heart attack situation where they gave streptokinase or something, and it reduced the size of the myocardial infarction. If they got it to them right away, they could reduce the size, and therefore you didn't have as much damage. We know that people who have had creatine in their diet and have higher brain creatine survive those conditions better. So that makes a lot of sense. So if I know that my brain energy can be affected and I'm going to have to go through, maneuvers, or I get caught up on a mission, or, some type of weather event hits and you're going to be having to work for hours on end, day after day to save lives, it makes sense not just to have a bunch of caffeine, but to have things that can increase your energy and brain power. And we now know that creatine in those short situations, high doses, seems to have some profound effect on your ability to think. Now, you couldn't ask somebody to do something more important to try to save lives in 36 hours. I was thinking about what happened here in Texas with the river. It was tragic. Those folks were running helicopters and working in boats and trying to save as many. If you can't think clearly after 24 hours or 18 hours, your next shift, or you want to keep on going to try to do as what you can, you need to be thinking clearly. And so those are those type of situations where if I know I'm getting ready, I get called up, and throw down some creatine and make sure you can get some extra brain power.
Absolutely. And I travel a lot. I carry little 5 gram packets. They're just kind of like those electrolyte packets. And so I can just easily throw a couple of those into water and it's right there. It's a lot easier than carrying around a big tub of
Yeah,
creatine. So,
it's not only for sleep deprivation, it seems to be also helpful for jet lag. So,
interesting.
Dr. Kandau, for example, he's one of the creatine researchers from Canada that's done a lot of work in this area. And he'll do 20 grams a day when he knows he's going to go from, he's in Western Canada all the way to Europe or something, this huge time change. And he just takes a lot of creatine and can survive and handle that jet lag better without as much fog. And seems to have better recovery. So there haven't been as many studies on that, but it makes sense. It's the same type of the sleep deprivation. So even long jet lag might have some benefit from it.
And, this weekend is daylight savings. Even a shift like that, it doesn't seem like much, but
Doesn't take
there is
much.
research that shows that 1 hour can actually make a difference in safety. So that may be one strategy to help your body just be able to accommodate that a little bit better. Well, Dr. Kreider, we've covered so many things. We've covered nutrition, muscle, and fitness, and we've covered creatine. So, for those workforce athletes who are driving home listening to this podcast, what are 3 things that you would like them to take away from this conversation?
I would say to realize that you're an athlete. You're a professional athlete. And the better condition you are, the better shape you're in, you'll be able to perform your job better. And if you're an athlete, you have to recover effectively. You have to fuel your body effectively. And you have to do things to help manage inflammation, fatigue, so that you're able to perform at a longer career in what you're doing. And so realize that you have control to make some impact. And so the first thing, you are an athlete. The next thing is nutrition does matter and exercise matters on improving your capability to perform your job throughout your career. Then I'd say is there's life beyond your career. And the point is that if you stay active, you lift weights, you do some walking or cardio, have a good quality diet that's, you know, food first, quality protein, enough carbohydrate to meet your needs, and essential fats. And then you look at maybe a few nutrients like creatine and other things that can help with long-term health. Um, then you're going to have a very productive and happy retirement as well. So think of yourself, you're a machine, put the right fuel in it, recover well.
Very well said. Our bodies are kind of like a 401k plan. You get what you put into it over the course of your life. And so having that long-term vision is so important. Dr. Carter, thank you so much. Your work reinforce is something we come back to on the WorkReady podcast all the time. And that's that performance recovery and health are not luxuries, they're systems. And when those systems break down, people get hurt, they burn out, or they leave the workforce early. So thank you for helping us translate decades of rigorous science into principles that don't just help people perform better, but last longer and live a life, they can retire strong and actually leave that legacy. If this conversation challenged how you think about nutrition, recovery, or what it really takes to sustain a physically demanding career, the best way to support the show is to follow or subscribe to the Work Ready podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, and share this episode with someone responsible for keeping people safe and capable on the job. We're so grateful for you joining us today, Dr. Kreider. And until next time, make sure take care of yourself, take care of your people, and stay work ready. Thanks so much.